and cooperation. I've also been studying martial arts for about 25 years and teaching self-defense for more than a decade. In this video series, we're going to talk about what I think is probably the most important part of self-defense, which ought to be taught and emphasized a whole lot more than it seems to be out there. And that is how to stop a fight before the fight even occurs. This is called conflict resolution for violent interactions. There's a lot of videos online you can watch about conflict resolution or conflict management in the workplace or between couples, but there's really not a lot of peaceful conflict resolution teaching as it relates to interactions between strangers where there's a potential for violence. Of course, there's a bunch of self-defense videos that talk about how to win a fight, and sure, self-defense is an important part of conflict resolution because it can in fact end a conflict, but unfortunately, many of these lessons don't address how not to strike at all, how to diffuse a situation before the fight even occurs. So this is really a significant gap in the conflict resolution field that I think needs to be addressed. And here's why it's so important. First, physical fighting has to be absolutely necessary, an absolute last resort after attempting peaceful resolutions whenever possible. Second, to fight effectively, you have to learn proper techniques and practice them. The same goes for peaceful resolution. You need appropriate nonviolent techniques in the face of conflict. Also, conflict resolution is way more applicable in way more situations than physical self-defense. Most adults in modern society will engage in an aggressive interaction with a stranger at least a couple times in their lives. But most of those people will also go through their adult lives without any incidents ever escalating to a physical altercation. And if a situation does occur with potential for violence, conflict resolution techniques can be learned a whole lot more easily by the average person than an aggressive self-defense move, which can take hundreds of hours of practice and mental conditioning to execute properly. Lastly, anytime there's a physical altercation, it can lead to a whole mess of legal and psychological problems, not to mention possible medical complications. So it's really important for everyone to learn about peaceful conflict resolution. It's way more practical and applicable throughout life for the average civilian in our society. And the techniques we're going to go over in the first few videos of this series apply to any situation in which aggression or violence is possible but has not yet occurred. Once violence starts, of course, you'll need to be able to escape or physically defend yourself, which we'll go over at the end of the series. But hopefully you can use these techniques and other conflict resolution materials to better understand conflicts and how to quickly and peacefully resolve it. Now, there's a lot of definitions used by scholars to delineate a conflict, but we're going to use a common definition simplified a bit using the concept of fundamental human needs to describe cooperation in conflict. So here it is. Cooperation is an interaction between two or more parties wherein each party feels they are sufficiently getting their needs met. And a conflict is an interaction between two or more parties wherein at least one party perceives another as threatening or preventing its needs from getting met. So let's talk about the subject of human needs as it relates to conflict and cooperation. When a conflict does arise, we can take a needs-based approach to understand what needs I have, which I might perceive as not being met, or what needs the other person has that he or she doesn't feel are being met or perceive as being threatened. We can then use some needs-based strategies to try to quickly get our own needs met if necessary and to get the other person's needs met, or at least restore perception that needs aren't being threatened so that we can get back to a state of cooperation and hence peace. Relating to each other in this very basic human level, regardless of our individual histories, can help us get from a state of conflict to a state of cooperation. This state illuminates our ultimate goal, and here it is. All conflict resolution has a goal of getting back to a state of cooperation. In other words, getting all parties' needs met as best as we can, and thus ultimately entering a state of mutual peace. This means recalibration of what we believe winning a conflict looks like. The goal is always peace, not conflict. So the only win actually is peace. We've been so conditioned by the media and violent movies and video games, maybe volatile relationships in our lives, that violence is often perceived as somehow okay, even desired, as long as we win the violent conflict. But this is not what conflict resolution is about at all. We have to realize that even if we get into a physical fight and win, it's not actually winning. We still lose. There are so many repercussions on both sides of the conflict, no matter who wins, that the costs almost always outweigh the benefits from a violent interaction. The only time this isn't true is when we survive a life or death attack, because surviving at any cost arguably is worth the repercussions. But that type of situation is extremely rare over the population. So again, we truly only win when the outcome is peaceful. Non-violent resolution, that's our goal. So we all have the same core needs, and a conflict is when one or more parties detect a threat to those needs posed by the other party. But let's talk about how to predict what needs a stranger might believe are being threatened in a potentially aggressive situation. There are a lot of needs theorists who have outlined what the fundamental human needs are in different ways using different names for them, but there are two primary needs that seem to be threatened anytime strangers are reactively in a conflict, meaning neither party planned it. and you could probably guess what they are. The two most common needs that are perceived as being threat between total strangers in a novel reactive engagement is basic physical safety and/or respect. So when resolving a conflict peacefully before an aggressive outbreak, we need to predict that the other person may perceive both safety and respect to be threatened. And so we address both of these needs in order to get the person to understand that in fact they are safe and that we do respect them as a person. So how do we do this? How do we turn off the fiery emotional reaction to a threat to human needs and thus calm down the situation so that no physical altercation is necessary? In this video series, we're going to learn techniques used to de-escalate conflicts before they begin, and then techniques to use during different levels of conflict. Each conflict level corresponds to the level of difficulty in resolving it. The higher the level, the more costly the resolution techniques typically tend to be. From low-level pre-violent conflicts at level 1, all the way up to severe violent conflicts at level 5. In the following video, we're going to start from the very first step in all of self-defense, which is situational awareness. And then we're also going to cover pre-interaction assessments and pre-conflict interactions. Then in the third video, we're going to get into conflict resolution techniques for a level 1 conflict, which is also called a reactive information gathering, and how these techniques directly address the aggressor's needs for safety and respect. The fourth video will cover resolution techniques for a level 2 conflict, which is usually escalated from level 1 and which is called pre-violent reactive challenging. And then finally, in the fifth and final video of the series, we're going to get into potential conflict resolution strategies at level 3, 4, and 5. A level 3 conflict is called violent resource acquisition, level 4 is reactive non-committed violence, and level 5 is premeditated committed violence. We'll go over more about what all these definitions mean in their respective videos. So stay tuned for some practical information and techniques for conflict resolution